The longship cuts through the North Sea fog before dawn. The men rowing it haven't slept in 2 days. Their hands are bleeding. Their lips are cracked with salt. And every one of them is exactly where they want to be. We think we know the Vikings. Horned helmets, berserkers, raiders screaming out of the mist. But the real story is stranger, richer, and far more human than the myth. Because the Vikings weren't just warriors. They were farmers, merchants, explorers, poets, and lawmakers, living inside one of history's most misunderstood civilizations. How does a people so romanticized become so completely misunderstood? And by the end of this, you'll understand why the thing that made Vikings terrifying wasn't their violence. It was everything else. This is the story of what it actually meant to live as a Viking. Before we talk about the raids, we have to talk about the world that made the raiders. Scandinavia in the 8th century is not the land of endless winter that modern imagination constructs. It is a land of brutal contrasts, long golden summers where the sun barely sets, and winters so dark and cold that the boundary between the living and the dead feels genuinely thin. The Norse people who inhabit this world are not primitives. They are adapted, hardened, ingeniously practical in the way that people become when the environment does not forgive mistakes. Most Vikings, and this word, in its own time, referred only to those who actually went on raids, not to all Scandinavian people. Most of them are farmers first. They grow barley, rye, oats. They raise cattle, sheep, pigs. They fish the rivers and the coastlines. A successful Norse household in the 9th century is a complex, interlocking economy of food production, textile manufacture, metalwork, and trade. The longhouse, the great rectangular hall that is home, barn, and meeting hall in one, is the center of this world. Families sleep near their animals in winter for warmth. Life is communal in ways that modern people find difficult to imagine. The Norse social structure is surprisingly fluid. At the top, the jarls, chieftains and warlords who command loyalty through generosity as much as force. In the middle, the carls, free farmers and craftsmen who own land, carry weapons, and have legal rights. At the bottom, the thralls, slaves, captured in raids or born into bondage, who represent perhaps a fifth of the total population. The fault lines are there from the beginning. Too many sons, too little land. The eldest inherits. The younger ones must find another way. And another way is exactly what they find. It begins with a ship. Not the famous dragon-proud longship of the raids that comes later, refined by generations of engineering. It begins with the realization, somewhere in the late 7th century, that the clinker-built boats of the Norse, overlapping planks of oak, flexible enough to bend with ocean swells rather than break against them, can go places that no other vessel in the world can reach. They can cross open ocean. They can navigate rivers only inches deep. They can be carried overland between waterways. No one in the monasteries along the northern coastlines of Britain and Ireland knows yet what this technology means for them. No one in the markets of Constantinople knows yet that traders from the frozen north will one day appear at their gates. No one in Newfoundland, across an ocean that European civilization considers the literal edge of existence, can imagine that strangers are already on their way. The first raid on Lindisfarne in 793 is not a beginning. It is a symptom. The pressure of land scarcity, the lure of wealth visible on those undefended island monasteries, the technical capability to strike and vanish before any organized resistance can form. These forces have been building for decades. When the dragon prows finally appear on the horizon that June morning, they look like something out of a nightmare. To the monks watching from the shore, they might as well be. No one who survived that morning knew they were witnessing the opening act of an era that would reshape the map of the known world. Life in the Viking Age accelerates fast once the raiding economy takes hold. But it is critical to understand that for most Norse people, raiding is seasonal and often a phase of life rather than a permanent condition. A young man might spend 3 or 4 summers on a long ship and the rest of his life on a farm. The violence is real, but it exists inside a civilization that also produces extraordinary things. The Norse legal tradition, for instance, is remarkable. The Thing, the assembly of free men that meets at regular intervals to settle disputes, pass laws, and make collective decisions, is one of the earliest functioning democratic institutions in the Western world. Iceland's Althing, established in 930 AD, is the oldest parliament still in existence. When a Norse farmer has a grievance, he does not petition a king. He brings his case before his neighbors. Judgments are negotiated. Compensation is calculated. The law is memorized and recited aloud by men called law speakers, whose entire function is to hold the legal code of the community in their heads. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the south, the Norse traders who call themselves the Russ are working their way down the river systems of Eastern Europe through the territories that will one day become Russia and Ukraine toward the markets of Byzantium. These are not raiders, they are merchants, hard, calculating men who deal in furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves, and who eventually found the city of Novgorod and established the ruling dynasty of Kievan Rus. The same cultural DNA that produces Ragnar Lothbrok also produces the founding fathers of Russia. The Norse also settle permanently. Normandy, the land of the Northmen, is carved out of France in 911 when a Viking chieftain named Rollo negotiates a treaty with the French king and becomes a duke. His descendants will rule Normandy, conquer England in 1066, and establish a royal line whose influence echoes through European history for centuries. The men who sacked Paris become the men who build cathedrals. But what happened next, what life actually felt like from the inside of this world, is the part most people have never considered. And it changes everything about how this story ends. To live as a Norse woman in the Viking Age is to occupy a social position that confounds every expectation. Norse women cannot go on raids. They cannot vote at the Thing. They exist inside a world defined by male violence and male honor. And yet, by the standards of virtually every other contemporary civilization, they are startlingly free. They can own property. They can divorce their husbands. They can reclaim their dowries. They can run farms, lead households, manage the entire economic apparatus of a Norse estate while their husbands are away for months or years at a time. The Völva, the Norse seeress, the woman who practices Seder magic and travels between communities, offering prophecy and spiritual counsel, commands fear and respect in equal measure. Even Odin himself, king of the gods, is said to have learned Seder from the goddess Freya. In a world where the spiritual and the practical are inseparable, the woman who speaks with the dead holds genuine power. The Norse relationship with death deserves its own reckoning. The great ship burials, like the one at Oseberg, where 2 women of extraordinary status were laid to rest inside a Viking longship filled with treasures, sleds, horses, and the tools of daily life. reveal a civilization that took the afterlife with complete seriousness. Valhalla is not a metaphor to these people. It is a destination. A warrior who dies in battle doesn't lose. They arrive. This belief does something specific to the calculus of violence. It removes the fear of death in a way that is not merely rhetorical. It makes certain men genuinely dangerous. And then, in the space of roughly 2 centuries, it ends. Not with a single defeat, not with a cataclysm. It ends the way most historical eras end, gradually, through conversion, through integration, through the slow replacement of one set of values with another. Christianity arrives in Scandinavia and does what it does everywhere. It delegitimizes the old gods, disrupts the ritual calendar, reframes the purpose of power. Herald Bluetooth, and yes, the Bluetooth symbol on your phone is named after a Viking king, converts Denmark to Christianity around 960. Norway follows. Sweden eventually follows. The thing survives. The legal traditions survive. The seafaring survives. But the spiritual architecture that gave the raiding culture its particular edge, the unironic belief in Odin's favor, in Valhalla as reward, in death in battle as the finest possible ending, that dissolves. And without it, the Vikings become Scandinavians. Which is to say, they become part of Europe rather than its most terrifying external force. The last great Viking expedition is arguably the Norwegian invasion of England in 1066, defeated at Stamford Bridge by Harold Godwinson, just 3 weeks before William the Conqueror's Normans arrived from the south. Former Vikings defeating Vikings, to be defeated by the descendants of Vikings. Even at the end, the story refuses to be simple. We started by asking how a people so romanticized became so completely misunderstood. The answer is this. We took the most dramatic 10% of Norse life. The raids, the berserkers, the dragon ships, and made it stand in for the whole. But the whole is more interesting. A civilization that invented parliamentary democracy and perfected the ocean-going vessel in the same generation. That produced poets who could compose intricate verse in the middle of a battle and farmers who crossed the Atlantic 500 years before Columbus. That gave women property rights that English women wouldn't see for another millennium. The Vikings were not a simple people who did simple violence. They were a complex people who did everything, farming and trading and lawmaking and exploring and, yes, raiding, with the same ferocious practical intensity. They were not outside of civilization. They were one of its most turbulent, creative, and underestimated expressions. And the proof is all around us. In the legal traditions, the place names, the genetic heritage, the royal bloodlines of half of Europe, in the word berserk, in the days of the week, in a Bluetooth symbol on a device that connects people across invisible distances, named for a king who understood 1,000 years ago that the future belongs to those who can bring people together. The longship didn't just carry raiders, it carried the world forward.